Olga is a not a recording in progress. She is a your fourth year.
Yes.
So fourth year in the PhD program. Um, and yeah, has a very diverse background in fine arts, right?
Yep.
And has worked with the county doing firearm violence prevention work. And yeah, it's just been a joy to have someone with such a diverse perspective and such an interesting way of looking at problems as well in a program that's typically dominated by social scientists. So yeah, it's been great. But we'll make a social scientist out of you yet.
That's right. That's what I'm here for.
So yeah, but Olga's going to share some of her work that she's working on for her dissertation. And Olga, if there's anything else you'd like to say before we start, and otherwise the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you all for being here on this rainy day. I'm very appreciative for the audience. Yes, my name is Olga Koumoundouros, and I'm a fourth year PhD student. And research focuses on systemic dynamics
right now.
Oh.
Most affecting young people experiencing unstable housing and their pathways to seeking safety and well-being. My dissertation topic focuses on understanding how positive adult relationships can mitigate the trauma symptoms of young people with gun violence exposure experiencing homelessness. Research shows that young people with minoritized racial ethnic identities like Black and Hispanic youth, Indigenous youth, sexual and gender minority LGBTQ youth are disproportionately represented among the population of unstably housed young people in the United States, making them subject to higher levels of everyday discrimination compared to housed young people. Unhoused youth with minoritized identities experience intersecting and compounding forms of discrimination. This occurs across multiple domains: service systems, education, policing, healthcare, employment, and public spaces. Most studies on discrimination of young adults experiencing homelessness have thus far focused on general discrimination. Williams and Krieger have both urged researchers to not only focus on the well-documented psychological effects of discrimination on mental health, which are important and well-established, but also to identify where these discriminatory experiences occur. Understanding the sources of discrimination makes it possible to additionally address systemic bias and revise institutional protocols rather than relying solely on individual anti-bias trainings. This study boiled our interests down to the following two research questions: how many young people experience discrimination from drop-in centers and healthcare agencies? And then which young people experience more discrimination from those two service settings that are vital to their well-being and that they depend upon? Racism, sexism, transphobia, and homophobia are treated here as structural mechanisms of marginalization, not isolated incidences, but operating through discrimination that amplify risk for youth experiencing homelessness. The risk amplification and abatement model frames these forces as structural and interpersonal processes that shape youth trajectories across family, peer, service, and institutional domains. Risk amplification occurs when discriminatory encounters with powerful service providers that act as gateways to health and survival reproduce power inequities and result in exclusion or denial of care. Risk abatement occurs in spaces that insulate youth from harm, such as drop-in centers that offer reprieve from surveillance or healthcare agencies that expand well-being. Through a conflict theory lens, Graham shows that service systems do not simply fail marginalized youth, they often reproduce inequities through structural racism, classism, homophobia, and transphobia. The Positive Youth Development Framework, PYD, complements RAM by emphasizing supportive relationships as developmental assets that buffer harm and promote resilience. Together, RAM and PYD highlight the dual role of service systems. When affirming, they redistribute power. through trust, rapport, and mentorship, fostering healing. When discriminatory, they reinforce marginalization and erode protective factors, compounding distress and long-term health disparities. We chose the following predictor variables based on literature. Firstly, the research suggests that the more time young people experience homelessness, the more events that impact their health and well-being they experience. Also, I have a paper in review that showed that young people with more time homeless, report more discrimination from each police, small businesses, and their community. So altogether, we hypothesize that the more time homeless may also expose them to more discrimination. Research indicates that people living unsheltered reported experiencing more discrimination, led to my understanding that they also may experience heightened amounts of discrimination when living unsheltered. Young people who live unsheltered tend to grapple with mental health impacts, engage in more time-intensive and durational, and engage less with time-intensive and durational services, and experience more violence while living exposed in public space. In my past paper, unsheltered youth showed more significant discrimination from police. Although a very different type of system, their risk was important to learn about, particularly since the point in time count shows the number of young people living unsheltered is increasing. Young people were considered to be living unsheltered when asked to report the location where they had slept the most in the past 2 weeks. They had slept in parks, sidewalks, the beach, bus stations, cars, abandoned buildings, all sorts of written-in places, all places not meant for human habitation. All these we aggregated into unsheltered. We also thought living unsheltered might make higher need for daily services, repetition just for survival's sake, yet them not choosing to take up long-term services that require more commitment and may lead to more long-term stability in housing. Foster care involvement was also included because literature showed a disproportional amount of yay having foster care histories. Literature suggests that due to structural racism, families with minoritized racial and ethnic identities experience more involvement with foster care. Also, while in their placements, these young people report discrimination experiences, particularly if they have minoritized identities that include gender minority and sexual minority. These young people develop trauma from experiencing forced family separation, which can have a developmental impact. They may miss knowledge about how to engage with doctors, nurses, and care providers in service settings. Literature also shows the opposite can be true, where although driven by survival strategies, they may develop strong skills in self-advocacy when navigating service settings. Driven by justified skepticism from a lot of past institutional experiences, these young people may be strong and vocal advocates. Additionally, literature also explains young people with foster care histories report differential treatment when in larger service provision settings like schools and youth programs. In this sample, 49% of youth experiencing homelessness reported having been arrested. This is close to half of our sample. Prior research indicates that young people with carceral involvement often face systemic neglect and denial of legally entitled services, both before and after sentencing. Once incarcerated, youth report experiencing high levels of discrimination and violence from staff and guards within carceral settings, as well as from police during the arrest process. Incarceration of young people creates another kind of forced family separation, also causing developmental gaps, trauma, and exposure to violence, impacting mental health and possible PTSD. In addition to a justified skepticism regarding services and institutions, young people with carceral history report discrimination experiences after reentry from schools, employment, and housing. In the method, interviews for this cross-sectional study were held between September 2016 and October 2018 using purposive sampling. Data originally came from the Have You Heard study, which was a longitudinal study of peer-led social network intervention that pursued HIV prevention among youth experiencing homelessness. All interested youth between ages 18 and 25 were included if they had experienced homelessness in the past 12 months. Interviews were conducted at 3 different youth drop-in centers in LA: My Friend's Place, the LGBT Center, and Safe Place for Youth. Surveys were administered using computer-assisted self-interviews, allowing participants to input responses privately and independently. Endorsements from the 2 questions were adapted from the Williams Everyday Discrimination Scale. Responses were subsequently counted from each question to create total sum values of discrimination experiences ranging from 0 to 7. Discrimination experiences were asked from drop-in center and healthcare agencies. Each kind of discrimination asked the same 8 questions from the Williams Everyday Discrimination Scale, which were modified from its original Likert scale to show intensity of an impact for each way discrimination was experienced. In our case, we just put in the different systems that most impacted young people. Participants checked all that apply from this list. I'm treated with less courtesy, less respect for services, treated as if not smart, as if they're better than me, not listened to, or none of the above. To avoid participant burden, we removed that Likert scale because young people engaged in these important questions. Because the outcomes were counts from a Qualtrics survey, we first considered Poisson regression. However, both discrimination measures exhibited over-dispersion, where the variance is larger than the mean, and a positive skew. Likelihood ratio tests confirmed the appropriateness of negative binomial models over Poisson. We looked at the data by PID to confirm the overinflation of zeros in the outcomes and decided they reflected substantive reports of no discrimination. That was clear because some answers were checked and others weren't. None reflected straight line. Race ethnicity included Black, mixed race, Latino, and other people of color, which was a combination of American Indian, Alaskan Native, Asian, Native Hawaiian, or other Pacific Islander because of low numbers. In this sample, 83% in total were youth of color, and 17% were white youth, which we made the contrast with. Gender included self-identifying male, female, gender nonconforming, or GNC. For GNC, we combined youth identifying as non-binary, transgender, and any gender expansive self-reports because of low numbers. We were not interested in gender assigned at birth in the study. For our model, we included male and GNC based on factors supported in the literature, and female was the contrast group. LGBTQ included gay, lesbian, bisexual, questioning, or unsure, asexual, another sexual orientation, which was a writing. We combined all of those into LGBTQ, and the rest were coded as heterosexual and was the contrast group. Time homeless was assessed by asking youth, how long have you been homeless or unstably housed in your whole lifetime? Answers were from less than 1 month to over 9 years. And we decided to measure this time for the percentage of a year. So all those different increments could be evaluated within the same measurement of time. As explained before in more detail, youth were counted as unsheltered based on their answers reporting the location where they had slept the most in the past 2 weeks. We aggregated all respondent answers indicating that they had spent the night in places not meant for human habitation. In this study, positive adult relationships were measured as non-staff adult. While much of the existing literature on youth experiencing homelessness emphasizes the importance of staff relationships, particularly given the developmental trauma many youth experience, and the role staff can play in bridging access to services, such relationships are often conditional and time limited, constrained by agency structure. Guided by the risk amplification and abatement model and by positive youth development theory, we hypothesize that non-staff adult relationships may serve as more enduring source of risk abatement because those relationships are not confined to agency boundaries or hours, and they may offer deeper trust, relational continuity, and mentorship that extends in depth and duration. 48% of young people reported discrimination from the drop-in center and 39% from the healthcare agencies. So you can see it's rather commonplace, but not quite half. For context, by comparison, our study on discrimination from public space showed worse frequencies, with 75% of EA reporting discrimination from police, 50% from small businesses, and 52% from communities. Here's the table with all the findings in their entirety. Now I'm going to go through each finding one by one. Young adults experiencing homelessness with mixed race identities reported an 86% higher rate of discrimination from drop-in centers compared to their white peers. LGBTQ+ EA reported a 107% higher rate of discrimination from drop-in centers compared to heterosexual peers. Each additional year of age among youth was associated with a 14% higher rate of discrimination from drop-in centers compared to their younger peers. Youth living unsheltered reported significantly less discrimination from drop-in centers, with a 39% lower rate than their sheltered peers. Youth with an arrest history reported lower discrimination from drop-in centers. Although this finding was marginally significant, it showed a strong trend. Now here is the table with all the findings in Model 2 in its entirety. I'm going to go through these findings. Okay, so youth experiencing homelessness with mixed race identities reported 134% higher rate of discrimination from healthcare agencies than white youth. Oops. Okay, LGBTQ+ youth reported a 69% higher rate of discrimination from healthcare agencies than heterosexual youth. This study suggests that service systems are not neutral spaces for youth. Prior research has established that youth experiencing homelessness have higher rates of discrimination generally, but there's been limited clarity about the two service systems that they are highly dependent upon. These findings point to a need to expand cultural education after identifying who faces the highest burden. Our use of RAM and PYD provided a theoretical understanding of systems, showing that structural inequities such as racism and homophobia may permeate service environments every day and situate discrimination, not as incidental, but as embedded within broader systemic dynamics. We found that mixed race youth face elevated risks of discrimination within both drop-in centers and healthcare agencies. Mixed race youth reported discrimination rates nearly twice as high as their white peers. This extends Milburn et al.'s 2010 foundational work on how racial and ethnic identity influences the mental health of youth. In that study, the authors found that controlling for race and immigration status, gender, and age, young people with a greater sense of ethnic identification experienced less emotional distress, while young people with a history of racial ethnic discrimination experienced more emotional distress. However, this protective effect that Milburn points to appears to apply primarily to monoracial youth and may not extend to those with multiple or ambiguous racial identities. Milburn et al. In 2010 noted that youth with such identities were previously understudied and may not benefit from the same communal or cultural buffering effects, a point our study supports, or it's a finding that our study supports. We hypothesize that while strong racial or ethnic identification can offer community-based protection, mixed race may encounter inconsistent belonging across both communities and service systems during homelessness. Our results suggest that these youth may lack access to reliable cultural support, experience racial misclassification, or feel pressure to align with one group over another, leaving them more vulnerable to invalidation and discrimination and its subsequent mental health consequences. These findings also build on the other paper we talked about, which the discrimination paper, which similarly found that mixed race youth experiencing homelessness reported heightened experiences of discrimination in community settings. LGBTQ plus youth reported discrimination in both the drop-in centers and healthcare agencies as well. From drop-in centers, rates of discrimination were more than double of their heterosexual peers and 69% higher in healthcare agencies. These findings align with prior research highlighting pervasive stigma and judgment towards sexual minority youth from service agencies for YA. That's in Gaddis in 2013 and Robinson in 2020. A study by Giuseppe in 2022 determined that such discrimination experiences for LGBTQ youth led to avoidance of services. Negative peer and client interactions and staff insensitivity were documented to lead to barriers to access, particularly in the homelessness care services that were not prominently LGBTQ oriented. In qualitative research by Di Giuseppe et al., it was recounted that heterosexual may not be able to recognize sexual minority youth, and when disclosed, it was common for homophobic reactions to be expressed that the staff tolerated. Robinson in 2020 reports high levels of sexual violence perpetrated against LGBTQ youth in shelters. And Gaddis in 2013 found significant associations between discrimination experiences and adverse outcomes such as depressive symptoms among YA. The findings highlight the persistent insensitivity, prejudice, and mistreatment encountered by LGBTQ youth in crisis response systems and in shelter services. A third discussion point is unsheltered youth often face barriers to service utilization, distance, distrust, stigma, so fewer reports likely indicate reduced exposure to the setting being measured. Drop-in centers, not necessarily better treatment. Yet when we did a sensitivity testing, we discovered that unsheltered youth respond to the question about drop-in center discrimination over 6 times more than the sheltered homeless youth. And this was with only 3% missingness as opposed to the 19% missingness that the sheltered homeless youth showed. So we have 2 hypotheses: that young people experiencing unstable housing that are sheltered may feel less comfortable sharing opinions about the services they're so dependent upon. They're vulnerable to these institutions working out for them. Maybe they feel uncomfortable or fearful answering the questions about discrimination because they're more enmeshed in those structures of service provision and have a system-dependent bias. Those youth that are street-based, however, the unsheltered youth, are answering with high rates. Maybe they don't have system-dependent bias. Maybe they don't think their answers are going to impact them. Our second theory is that drop-in centers are fulfilling a need for the most vulnerable young people, which are those living unsheltered, who are most exposed in public spaces. And in the case of young people that have likely experienced great amounts and great severity of incidences of discrimination, while jailed, incarcerated, in foster care and probation, and the hassling and violence by police, when living unsheltered. Facing discrimination from community members when living unsheltered, oh, I mentioned that. They may not recognize the discrimination experiences by comparison. Perhaps they're showing up to the drop-in centers as they are providing their needs. Perhaps the staff are a little more in tune with acceptance and outreach to the street-based and system impact young people. Youth with arrest history showed a trend of less discrimination from drop-in centers, with a 31% lower rate than they with no arrest history. Though this finding was marginally significant, it had a strong trend toward a significance. Literature acknowledges that young adults experiencing homelessness report a disproportional amount of arrests than stably housed young people. We hypothesize that these more system-impacted YA would report more discrimination than YA without arrest experiences. However, from the drop-in center, we found there were significantly less reports of discrimination from the young people with arrest history. Perhaps this is where the drop-in center's commitment to accepting young people where they are at gets applied. Maybe they carry an awareness of the policing that unstably housed youth people face, and as a policy, provide them support. Another possibility is that when arrested and dealing with all the levels of the carceral system, they get exposed to such great degrees of discrimination and harassment from police, guards, fellow inmates, that by comparison, any discrimination experiences they have from the drop-in center, these don't get recognized in their mind as such, again, by comparison. Literature has shown that transitionally aged young adults experience a gap in services. The transition from youth-based services that drop-in centers utilize often has a cutoff at 24. So once hitting a 25th birthday, young people age out of services. This process of aging out is hard because referrals to adult services are often fraught. Adult services are developmentally inappropriate, can be unsafe places. Addiction and serious mental health issues look different among adults than they do to youth. Loss of access to programs and staff that provided emotional and personal support can feel like a leap for transitionally aged youth. This points to the need for expanded transition-based services. These need funding and capacity building, as this group also has a different need than the younger groups. Even though this data set is dated, so now these are the limitations. I believe it's important to analyze secondary data to understand meaningful trends, even if social conditions have changed. When doing community-based research, it's important to be mindful that every time we tap our communities with another survey for more information, such research can feel one-directional or extractive, so we have to make it worthwhile. Negative binomial models identify directional risk patterns, higher or lower discrimination rates, but cross-sectional data preclude causal inference. So we use negative binomial regression in this study, and it allows estimation of this directional risk, identifying which identity and system-involved variables were associated with greater or less rates of discrimination. However, because the data are cross-sectional, these patterns can't establish causal direction or temporal sequence. So, for example, while some groups like LGBTQ and mixed race youth face higher rates of discrimination, it remains unclear whether these experiences preceded or resulted from or were reinforced by system engagement. Thus, the models describe relative risk in the present context, but cannot determine how risk processes evolve over time. Participants were identified through non-probability sampling strategy in an urban area. Thus, the study findings may not be generalizable to non-urban areas. Sample size was also too small to measure interaction effects, which could show intersectional framework quantitatively. So we encourage studies with large samples to apply an explicitly intersectional theoretical framework and statistical method to quantitatively analyze young adults experiencing homelessness, to understand how the relationships between race, gender, and sexual identity intersect and impact perceptions of discrimination. Youth, future directions. Youth experiencing homelessness are a group of people still developing their personhood and require affirming platforms to live that provide societal belonging and encourage multiple avenues for expression of their voices so they may fully develop and thrive. We know from neuroscience, the brains of these young people offer much growth developmentally and neuroplasticity. These all indicate much room and benefit for rehabilitation, education, and healing. Based on our findings, we support widespread public education tailored to specific services so they're not the sites of additional stress for young people. The elevated discrimination reports by mixed race and LGBTQ+ underscore how rigid identity categories in both research and service systems fail to reflect the fluidity of the lived experience of these young people. Institutional reliance on binary classifications like male, female, black, white, gay, straight reveals a deeper cultural resistance to acceptance of fluid and intersectional identities. As Crenshaw in 1991 and Collins in 2019 argue, such categorical attachments sustain structural hierarchies by privileging legible normative identities while obscuring overlapping forms of marginalization. Brown in 2015 similarly shows how systems of surveillance and recognition render certain identities hypervisible, yet illegible, reinforcing exclusion. Within this context, youth who resist fixed labels encounter greater invalidation and discrimination in services meant to support them. Researchers can examine how their own measurements and modeling practices may replicate this rigidity and find a way to adopt approaches that honor identity, complexity through intersectional frameworks and participatory youth-defined measures. These campaigns can be tailored with cultural and linguistic specificity to lead with our hearts and our minds to generate a sense of compassion and kinship between members of communities across different identities and housing statuses. Lastly, I wonder if there's an opportunity here under this current political climate to not only better represent under-resourced groups and communities by providing more inclusion, but also by avoiding the existing flagged binary terms and go deeper into the problems. Develop new, well-considered measures and terms. For instance, UCR Professor Brandon Robinson suggests that the family rejection narrative that is such a big part of youth homelessness literature exists within a context of poverty, racism, and economic instability itself. This further underscores the need for intersectional research to get at the extent of these dynamics. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
We have about 10 minutes or so for questions.
I know, it went a little long.
Well, no, it's good.
Yeah.
So anyone in the room, we do room or online, whoever.
Yeah.
To the
Oh,
punch
yeah.
room. Yeah. Oh, if you can monitor online, anyone?
Oh, Eric.
Oh, I was applauding, but I'll just say
I saw
this is a great study. I mean, you and I have spent a lot of time talking about this work over time, and I think I just wanted to, as maybe a brief comment, is just talk about especially the discussion section and how your engagement with this community and the community of providers that I know you've been pretty heavily involved in the last couple of years in the context of the work that we're doing together and collecting, data for your dissertation and the like really kind of shows up. And I'm, just kind of maybe as a follow-up question to that, sort of to what extent are your discussion points motivated by those experiences and especially your thoughts about the programming?
At the drop-in center specifically?
Yeah, because I know you've spent a lot of time in drop-in centers the
Oh,
last 2
yeah,
years.
I totally have. And yeah, absolutely. I think having spent time volunteering there, and then 2 years of serving, in addition to all the volunteering, I really got to know these young people and saw um, the way they want to identify, and the shifting constantly, and the need for agency and expression. It was beautiful and resilient, and I feel very, but I think even all the other details, like program use and unsheltered dynamics, I think I got a real lot of insights, and continue, actually, even this summer, and how things have sort of changed with the political climate. Yeah. Um, yes. How do I see somebody's got a
I was just
question.
saying, Patricia, you can
Okay.
ask your question.
Sorry, having trouble unmuting. Thank you for this presentation and for your work here, and certainly the compassion that you clearly bring to the work. I also applaud that you were involved with the sites and spent time there, because the devil is in the details in a lot of these interactions. And I think this is a really important issue. I do have one comment, and that is, or one observation, that may be another limitation, and that is that the service providers that you worked with are, and I've worked with people there too, are very welcoming places. And so I'm wondering if in some ways your sample is somewhat biased, because they're youth who are a convenient sample and they're going to these very welcoming places, and perhaps they're there because of prior discrimination. It just seems like a little bit of a limitation. And I have one more question. How many mixed race folks did you have in your sample? I just worry that that's like a sample size thing.
I'm looking that up right now. I don't remember the number. Um,
Yeah, it was in, I think, probably in one of your tables.
okay, so it was 54 out of
Okay.
222.
Oh, that's a pretty good sample.
24%, 24.3%.
Yeah, and yeah, that's interesting. I think it might be interesting to at some point have a look at maybe data from the youth count, the youth pit count, to see if you can use there's a drop-in center flag on that. And just that if you pick certain census tracts, you'll capture SPY, LGBT, and My Friend's Place. And there you might be able to tease out the mixed race percentages reported there for those places contrasted with other places. Yeah, it's just another data point. And those data are tough too, and they're sampled, and there's a lot of error. But it is like I think the N on that is somewhere in the 200 to 300 range. So it's a comparable sized sample as well. Oh, and one other thing is,
Of course, yeah.
just because it's a survey and you really do have a lot of clustering here, is there any method to adjust the standard errors for that clustering? Do you know what I mean?
Um,
Because otherwise you may underestimate the standard error. There's methods. I don't know what statistical package you're using, but
Stata.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I was using Stata. Oh,
So there's SVY routines. You could look those up for surveys, and it's SVY colon in front, and then you can set up your strata or whatever you're clustering. It uses PSUs and strata. So in your case, it might just be the site, because that would be your clusters. And there's also, I've noticed in the count, quite a bit of movement between the LGBTQ Center and SPY, and also my friend's place. There's quite a bit of overlap there. So anyway, very nice job though. Thank you.
yeah, thank you. I do want to say I appreciate your comments very much. I really struggled initially with doing a study that might potentially come off as critical of places that are so supportive and welcoming and um like fulfill a need like no other. I feel very and yet at the same time, I thought there was value to open up the conversation. But I am trying to keep my feeling of uh high regard really present while also because isn't that what we have an opportunity to do when we have a great relationship with one of these agencies is to refine and dialogue.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know if you asked the question of, and probably it would have been sensitive to participation, rating their discrimination level at the site that they were at, but at least you could qualify in your discussion that this may be a selective group and their practices seem to attract people who have experience, or, just to lay that out as a possibility. That makes sense. Kind of covers yourself on it. So,
Yeah.
Thanks. I think we have a question in the room.
Yeah, I
Robert,
just want to make a comment, Olga.
on Maria.
That was a good study that you highlighted, right? I really feel it bodes well for drop-in center, which is right now on the chopping, right? It's a very sensitive subject matter. But I think what I like to highlight is the system impact that you touched by the Carson system. The fact that you demonstrate that they feel less discriminated in these environments that are, I would say, maybe presenting more of a less surveillance and more presence and receivership, right?
Yeah.
That's highlighted. And then the other observation is really looking at once the population is aging out, it's hard to receive services because it's about age. And we need to look at less about age and more about development because of the trauma exposure. So I think those are two observations I really highlight and really is demonstrated in this study in particular. The need for these drop-in
Yep.
centers, how system impact youth that have been touched by the Carson system feel safe and welcome, and also less about age, more about development based on the trauma.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Really maybe build that really strongly, a little bit of my discussion. Thank you.
Maria, do you have?
Thank you, Olga. Thank you so much. I was thinking about your presentation and two things come up. One is I have a ping pong ball going through my head right now because you really opened up a lot of ways to theorize about discrimination, how it affects so many groups that we work with and what it means about service delivery, right? And the other thing that I want to compliment you on is you don't just study this, you immerse yourself in it. And you could have just done a secondary data analysis and gone home, right? But you volunteer, you make yourself present, the way you posture yourself as a scientist are ways that we should all emulate. Okay, so with that introduction, I have a couple of questions. Okay, just a couple of questions.
Beautiful.
I really zoned in on the probes that you asked, like your Likert scale to some extent. It had like, I feel that I'm not wanted here, or I'm not liked, or they're afraid of me, etc. Were those prompts followed up with, because I was in jail, because I am I was in foster care? In other words, did they link their response to a status?
They did,
Uh-huh.
they did. One of the issues was the check all that apply. Like there were many statuses. And then, it was not, the response was not, asked, I think, across. There was something about this, it was a less strong question. In that it wasn't lined up with the data set that I was working with.
Mhm.
So that particular answer exists in the room, exists on the grader, but I wasn't able to use it here.
I see.
It was somehow, it just didn't have as much. Oh, Eric's got it.
Yeah, I was going to say
It's
so.
got
Just
it.
the fine points, because this was the
Yeah.
data that I helped collect, was that the one thing that we didn't do very well with this was the one thing that we did well with this was we asked about discrimination across about 6 different settings. The problem was that at the end we only asked, was this as a result of, and we had several different categories or identities that you could identify as being the primary source of this sense of discrimination, but we didn't tie it to each one of those questions individually. And so at the end of it, we felt like Olga and I had a bunch of conversations about this 2.5 years ago. So it was we don't know which questions they're talking about when they say they felt like this was because of their race or their gender or their incarceration. And so in the end, it seemed not so safe to really dive into that part of it, which is kind of a missed opportunity on the part of the data collection team, i.e. me.
And
Yeah,
would have
because-
followed
so
the
you-
Williams protocol appropriately, because that was part of it, but. Yeah,
Yeah, so you dealt with it more in a global way, discrimination, just face value, not because of their perception of a status or identity that they.
for
They
each
have-
question,
for
we
each
didn't
question,
have
yeah.
that follow, it was
Okay.
just at the
Okay.
end, yeah.
And then I'm sorry but slide 22, you were talking about the mixed race.
Yeah.
And you made some contention there about mono something.
Yeah.
That it was consistent or non-consistent with having same race or ethnicity, same identity. Provider, was it provider or services?
That's a good question.
Because I'm not sure you tested that, but was it just a discussion point as an implication? It was one of your discussion
was-
points.
Less stress. So it wasn't, Milburn's study talked about emotional stress when experiencing discrimination experiences with youth homelessness. Wasn't where they had that experience, but in general, discrimination experience, if they had discriminate, they had more stress. And if they had a monocultural racial identity, they experienced less
Less stress.
emotional distress. Emotional distress was the measure.
Okay, thank you for
In
that
general.
clarification.
Yeah,
But great presentation and
Yeah.
good luck with this work.
yeah, thank you.
What we have, oh wait, one last question goes to Olivia.
So there's just a following what Maria mentioned that one. I have seen this one before, but I don't know why it didn't occur to me before. But one of the things is that the discussion about the mixed race, you are really relying on this one, like what you just described. If you're mixed race, you are feeling more like you don't sense that belonging, it's a sense of belonging. So versus so you have mono like race and ethnic background, you may have that one. To do that, the capacity you have is the background scope is actually loud. So if you wanna talk about that mono versus mixed race, the reference book should be mixed race. So that, and that you can compare, so that there is a little bit of text that you can, and having that mixed race as reference group. And when I started the discussion point, I was like, I don't know why it didn't occur to me, why I was looking at your presentation and listening to the others, I felt like, yeah, you should test, if you're gonna make that claim,
Yes.
and then given that you have a decent size of a mixed race, 25%, then having that one as a reference group and test that and see whether or
Okay.
not that is actually.
That's great. Okay, I'll do that. Thank you.
Great, well, thank you all for making the time. Olga might stick around for a couple more minutes if there are some other questions in the room.
Yeah, thank
Otherwise-
you all so much. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
that.